Hey everyone, and welcome back to the final episode of the MERN Stat Crash Course. In this episode, we're going to take care of all the CSS styling to make our site look nice. We'll add all sorts of colors, spacing, fonts, and more to make it look like an actual functional website, instead of just looking like a super basic template site. For this project, we're going to use a tool called Shadcn. It's a CSS tool that's kind of like Bootstrap if you're familiar with that. Basically what it does is it just gives us a bunch of pre-built components that we can copy and paste into our code, and they're all available on the website here. That way, we don't have to become graphic designers. After all, I'm not a graphic designer and I don't pretend to be, so I'll leave it to the actual designers to take care of the CSS and we'll just implement it in our code. How Shadcn works is a bit unique when compared to other CSS frameworks. It's not actually a library like Tailwind, and we're not actually installing some big library in our code. Shadcn has a bunch of different components like the one you see here on the left-hand side, and they're all available on the website with the code attached to them. Let's say, for example, I want to access the alert dialog. I can go to this page and see an example of what it looks like. Pretty nice, right? I can open this, it has this window here, and this is just a basic component of a alert dialog. If I want to get the code for it, I can click on this code thing here, and it'll tell us how to implement it in our code. The only steps that we need to take for each component is to actually install the component in our library by using this command here, and then we can use this code however we please to add it into our own code. Shadcn uses Tailwind, and it will set it up by default whenever we set up Shadcn. Tailwind, if you're not familiar with it, is a very popular CSS framework that basically just allows you to write CSS inline very easily, removing the need for CSS files. You'll see how it works in just a minute. Let's go ahead and get Shadcn set up first, which will set up Tailwind as well. And before we add any components, we need to configure our environment to work with Shadcn. We use Vite to create our React app, and if we head to this page here, it tells us exactly how we can get that set up with React and Vite. And we're actually going to follow these steps exactly, except for step 1 because we've already done that when we first created our project. So let's start at step 2. So first, it tells you how to get Tailwind set up. Before we do that, we're going to make sure we're CD'd into our frontend folder because we want to install it in the frontend folder itself. And then I'm literally just going to take these commands, copy them, and I'm going to paste them into our terminal, and I'm going to run each of these individually. So we went ahead and ran that command. Let's run this command next, npx tailwind css init, which should actually initialize our project as a Tailwind project. The next thing we'll need to do is step 3 right here. And by default, since we're using JavaScript, we don't have a tsconfig.json, but we can actually make our own. I'm going to make one. I'm going to call it, actually, make sure we're in our front end folder here. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call it jsconfig.json. And I'm going to take all this code here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to paste it right into this file. Next, let's move on to step 4. And we have this command here, npm i-d types node. Copy that, paste it into here as usual, and we're going to go ahead and install that. Next up, it's telling us to go into our vite.config file. So let's go ahead and head into there. And you see here that we have a file that looks somewhat similar, but we need to go ahead and add a few things here. So first of all, we need to import this path from path. So let's get that added. And then we just need to add this chunk of code right here. And this is actually just to resolve the paths, so that whenever we import our Shadcn components, there isn't any errors when we're trying to import them. So let's do this, go ahead and add that here, and save this file. And now this file looks exactly like this one over here, so we should be good to go. Next up, we actually initialize our Shadcn project. To do that, we'll just copy this line here, and we're gonna go ahead and paste it into our terminal, just like before. And this will actually create our project as a Shadcn project. And here it's going to ask us a bunch of questions actually. So first it says, would you like to use TypeScript? And we're using vanilla JavaScript. So I'm going to say no. Which style? Let's go with default style. Which color? I'm going to go with zinc as a color here. Global CSS. Let me double check this path here. So this is in this file. So global CSS should be in, let me see, should be / from the front end folder. It is /source/ index.css, just like this. CSS variables, I'll go ahead and say yes for this. Then it's asking if we're using custom Tailwind prefix, which we'll just leave blank. We'll just say no. Tailwind.config.js, it should just be in this same directory. So it should say tailwind.config.js like this. Alias, we'll keep this at components here. Keep this the same. React server components. We're not using Next.js, so I'm going to go ahead and say no because all of our stuff is client side. Write configuration to components.json, proceed, press Y, and we should now be good to go in just a moment. And now we're good to add Shadcn components as we see fit. So let's go ahead and shrink this down here, close this out, and let's actually get started now with styling our website. But before we do anything else, let's get started with a clean slate. Let's see here, I'm getting an error on the import. Go ahead and refresh that. It looks like we're back to normal. And you can see here our page already looks drastically different because of what we've imported from Shadcn and gotten Tailwind installed. I'm actually going to go into app.css here, and I want to start on a completely clean slate here. So I'm going to erase pretty much all of this here. I'm going to get rid of all this. The only things I'm going to keep are text align center, and I'm going to keep the margin as well. But I'm going to do everything else gone. And now if you look at our page here, it looks even worse. It looks pretty bad here. Everything sitting at the top of the page, kind of just chilling out. But starting on a clean slate makes it a lot easier for us. So everything else besides these two things has got to go, and we're going to start right here. This means that pretty much 100% of our styling is gone, but now we're ready to do with it whatever we'd like. Before we work on any specific pages, let's do one more thing. Shadcn allows you to customize your colors however you want. If we actually open up here and go to our index.css file, you'll see it added a bunch of stuff in here whenever it first configured our project. All of these values that you see here are different color values, and these are all HSL values. This background right here is going to be white, and foreground is going to be black or pretty close to black. We're going to keep those two the same, but I'm going to change this primary right here. For our primary, I'm going to roll with a somewhat darkish blue. I looked at some color codes earlier, and one that I liked was 219, I believe it was 83, and then 40. And we're going to save that and use that as our primary color. If you want to get more creative with the colors and add more stuff with the palettes, feel free to. But now that we have these out of the way, let's start customizing our pages, and let's get started with the landing page first. This over here looks pretty hideous, so let's spice it up. First things first, let's get this stuff centered right in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and make an outer div here, and let's add some Tailwind. And this is where you get to see where Tailwind actually works in action. Basically, we can just write inline CSS using class name, and then writing whatever properties we want. So I'm going to make this a flex box, so I'm going to say flex. I'm going to give it justify center to horizontally align our items. Item center to vertically align our items, and then I'm going to say I want the width to be the entire screen, and I want the height to be the entire screen as well, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. This is going to make the view the entire screen and should put the item somewhat nicely here in the middle. But all of our form stuff is still out of whack. We want this to be going vertically, not horizontally. So I'm going to go ahead and make these divs as well so we can do some styling. And the only reason I'm adding divs here and not doing like the empty brackets is because we can't add a class name property to an empty fragment. We have to have something in front of it, which is why I'm adding div. So let's add this. Let's give this a class name as well and give this one some styling too. What I'm going to do is say, I'm going to give it flex call, which stands for flex column and gets it to go vertically. I'm going to give it a width of 96. Let's make sure we're setting up in a column-like format and we're setting our width to be something convenient. And I'm going to actually go ahead and take this same class name, and I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it into here, and we'll make this a div as well. That way our create new account view is the same thing. This still looks pretty wacky, so we'll need to customize the actual login and create user components to make this look a little better. But first, let's actually import a button component from Shadcn to make this button look nicer. And here's where I get to show you how Shadcn actually works. So first things first, we'll go over here, and we'll look in the component library, and let's find button. So button is right here in Shadcn, and we see it looks something like this, which will do, right? So I'll go here and go into my terminal, make sure we're looking in the front end folder, and it gives us the command to install it into our code. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to paste it right here, and we're going to add this component into our code here. And you will notice that what it actually does, if I shrink this, go to our file explorer, is it adds inside of our components folder, this UI folder. This is where it actually stores the Shadcn components that we need. So that's what I meant when I was saying it's not a traditional library, because whenever you install it, it basically just adds it as if it's just another React component. So let's go ahead and close out of this, and let's head back to our landing page here, and it actually tells us exactly how to import it. We just saw it's in the components and UI folder, and this is how we're going to import it into this file here. So we're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to paste it at the top of the landing page. And then literally all we need to do to change this is you see here that this button is capitalized. So let's change this B to button because it's an actual component. And we'll make sure we change the end tags as well. So this should be capital B, and this should be capital B as well here. And if I go ahead and save this page, look back at our site, you can see we now have a button that, although this form still looks messed up, this button does look quite a bit nicer. But let's go ahead and fix this form real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the login page, or the login component actually. Go ahead and open this, and let's get started in this file. First, I'm going to go ahead and import that same button that I just got, and this should be, it's autofilling. Should be button from, and this is @/components/UI/button. So we're going to import this, and I'm going to import something else from Shadcn as well. So if we go ahead and go over here and we look at the input one, I want to make our input fields look a little bit nicer for our form. And this actually looks quite a bit better than the default. So I'm going to take this as well. So I'm going to go back to our terminal here and let's actually install this component. So right here, you see is this command right here. So we're just going to copy it. We're going to paste it right into our code. Go ahead and run it. And that will be installed in our code. And you'll see that it should have added it right here in our UI folder. To import it, we're just going to take this command here, import input right here. Go ahead and copy and paste it. And save the file. And now let's get back to the page. And just like last time, all we need to do is go down into our JSX and we'll change these to be actual components instead of just the default JSX tag. So this will be capital I with input. This will be capital B for button. And these fields, what's nice about Shadcn is that these fields will all stay the same. I don't need to make any other changes to them. So we're gonna make this button as well. Make sure this is all looking good. Go ahead and save this file. And here you can see our form changed quite a bit and looks nicer. We want this to stay as a nice column, so let's go ahead and add class name equals flex and flex column for our form here. And now it'll make the buttons equal size. Lastly, let's make them a little less clumped up together by adding some margins. So I'm going to go actually starting at the, the password right here. I'm going to add a class name and I'm going to add a bottom margin, which I can just say is MB. And I'm going to set that equal to, let's say 4 for right now. Let's do that right there. And you can see it separates those two out. And actually, I'll set it to each of our things here. I'll do this for the email as well. And then also the login button. So we have bottom margins on all of them. And it separates out our form a little nicer. Now, this looks nice, but if we go into our create new account, this still looks pretty bad. So let's actually go into our create user page and let's make the exact same changes that we just did with the other file. So let's go ahead and import the input. We're going to import the input, and I wish it would help me out here in autofill, but it's not. So I'll do from this should be components/UI/input. And then we'll do the same thing here for button as well. So let's import this as button. And this should be from the button file. And then once we have that, we'll go down here. This is what we did last time. We will change these from lowercase inputs to capital inputs to show that they are Shadcn components. Go ahead and do button here and button here, save, and we're looking a lot better. And I'll do the exact same thing where I'll make it flex and then flex column to make the buttons the same width. And then I'm going to add some bottom margins on all of these as well. So we'll do class name equals, we'll say bottom margin 2. And then actually, I think I did 4 in the other one. I'm going to change that to 2 as well because I think this looks a little nicer. Let's just space that out. And then we'll add 1 here as well. So they're all looking a little bit spaced out. So let's actually go back here and yeah, I'm going to change these back to bottom 2 instead of 4. So let's do margin bottom 2, 2, 2. And those are looking a bit better, and we'll keep this one spaced out just to keep it kind of on its own. Now that we've done that, let's log into our app and let's get started with the bulk of the styling. So I'm going to go ahead and log in like normal. And the great thing is that all the styling won't change the functionality at all. So I'll go ahead and go here, log in. And wow, this looks absolutely terrible. Let's get started with a few things right away, starting with our navbar. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to our navbar component and let's get started in here. Let's actually go into Shadcn and let's find their navigation component. I believe, yeah, it should be here and it should be called navigation menu. So just like we've done before in the past, I'm going to go ahead and open up our terminal here. And then we're going to take this command to add the navigation menu component into our code. Go ahead and paste that in here. And that will install it. And here it tells us how to use the code. And this time, unlike the other ones, it actually has multiple imports for different components. So I'm actually going to take this whole thing here, this whole import statement, shrink this down here, and I'm going to import that whole thing into our code. So let's go ahead and scroll down. I'm actually going to get rid of this navbar and nav item because obviously you wiped our CSS out, so these don't apply anymore. Once we have all these things imported, let's actually wrap a bunch of our elements in these tags. We're only going to use a few of them. We're going to use navigation menu, we're going to use menu list, menu item, and then menu link, and we'll delete what's left. So first off, I'm going to start with navigation menu. So this should be the outermost one. I'm going to say navigation menu, and we'll make this navigation menu as well. And the nice thing is that when we do this, it'll automatically apply Shadcn styling. And then I'm going to do right here, I'm going to do navigation menu list. This will be where we're mapping stuff out. So this will be our list of stuff. Take this here, and let's enclose this whole map statement in the navigation menu list and tab it just to make it look a little bit nicer. And then for each thing that we're returning from the map statement, each of these should be a navigation menu item, which there's actually one for that, navigation menu item right here. So let's go ahead and add that. We'll just go around here and we'll say navigation menu item. We'll take this, that, and we'll go ahead and paste it into here. And then at the very bottom here, right where we have our button, instead of saying button, what we're going to do is we're going to give it the navigation menu link here. We're going to replace that on the bottom as well. And this will be all the filling in that we're going to do with Shadcn components. So if we go ahead and go back to our page, you can see it actually doesn't look that much different still. So let's actually add some Tailwind to this to make it look a little bit better. First things first, we're going to go into navigation menu and we're going to give it a class name. We're going to give it this. And then the first thing we're going to do is set it to primary so that the whole thing becomes blue. Next, I'm going to do a few things to make it look like an actual navbar. I'm going to set it to fixed. I'm going to set it to the width of the entire screen. We're going to set it to be at the very top of the screen and the very left side that was aligned. We'll give it a height of 20 and we'll give it a padding of 2. Go ahead and save it. And it looks like this. Now it's stuck at the top of the screen like an actual navbar, but it still looks really messed up because this stuff is still right next to it. So it's not looking like an actual proper navbar yet. One thing we could do is edit the actual navigation menu component from Shadcn itself. So I'm going to go in here and let's actually make a change here. Let's find the original navigation menu here at the very top. And let's actually remove this max width here. And then once we do that, that will actually make it look like it is a proper navbar going across the entire screen. And actually one thing I forgot to add is right here on the menu link, there's actually a class name thing from Shadcn that you have to add to make it behave properly. I believe it is, yeah, it's this right here, this navigation menu trigger style. I'm going to go ahead and import this as well because it's not part of our original import list. Go ahead and import this. And then what we need to do is just add that as a class name to our menu link to make it look like it is actually a real link. So we'll do this, add it here, go back to our page, go ahead and save. And you can see it now actually makes these as buttons and it makes them look quite a bit nicer. Here's another problem though. Right now our navbar is overlapping with our actual site content and it does look really messy. So let's go ahead and fix that. To go ahead and fix that, we can go ahead and head over to our layout component here. Because if you remember, this layout file right here is the parent component of all components that have a navbar. One easy way we can fix this whole overlap issue without having to correct every single page individually is just going in this component here and adding some custom Tailwind styling. So right now we're rendering outlet. I'm actually going to wrap this in another tag. I'm going to call it main. So let's go ahead and take this and let's render outlet inside main. And then I'm going to give this main a class name and we're going to add a couple of custom Tailwind properties. We're going to do flex. We're also going to do, let's say with screen, we're going to justify its center so it's horizontally aligned. And then we're going to give it a top margin of 24. And this top margin of 24 should give us enough breathing room, hopefully with our navbar. If we save it, you can see that our content is now sitting in the middle and it's below our navbar so it's not interfering and overlapping. Since we're on this home page, let's go ahead and get our BlogCard component cleaned up since we have no styling right now for that. So let's go in here, let's go to our components and let's find BlogCard. First, let's get the actual card component from Shadcn. So we're going to go up here, we're going to find card, and here's the command to actually install it. So we'll go ahead and copy it. We'll open up our terminal and we will go ahead and add that component to our project. And then just like with the navigation menu, I'm going to take these imports here and we're going to import all these different things. So we'll go up here, copy it, and paste them right here. Since card here is the base layer, let's go ahead and wrap this entire thing in card. So we'll take this, cut this, and paste it right here. So this whole thing is now wrapped around card. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make our title and our description both wrapped around card header. So we'll add these, we'll wrap both of these around. And then we're going to do card title and card description respectively for each of these. So we'll say card title, and we're going to wrap that with here. And then we're going to give this one card description. And we're going to obviously wrap this one as well. Go and space these out. So this looks a little bit cleaner. And then just for the sake of this card looking decent, as you can see here, it looks a little better. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap our date as being part of the card content. Even though our card doesn't really have a whole lot of content on it, we'll just do this for organization's sake. Go ahead and save it. And you can see our cards look decent now. It's looking a lot better, but we're still not done. For each card, I'm going to go ahead and add a class name here. And I'm going to make it, I'm going to say flex and then with full to make sure it fills its entire container. And I'm going to do justify center. I'm going to do margins on the y-axis of 8 to set the vertical margins. And then I'm going to give it a hover property as well. When we hover over it, I actually want to set the background to muted. Muted is one of the Shadcn default colors for things like highlighting. I'm going to go ahead and save that. This looks a little different now. And I can see if I hover over them, they highlight that kind of off grayish color. Also, if we hover over them right now, notice how I have the cursor as a pointer right here. But if I go to the edge, it's not fully covering, which means this link here isn't fully part of this card. So I'm going to go ahead and into this class name here. I'm going to remove this post and I'm going to add with full. That way the link will cover the entirety of the card. I'm also not really a huge fan of how this header right now looks in the card. I mean, it looks decent, but I want to change it a little bit. So I'm going to go into Shadcn and they have a tab here called typography that basically has the customizations for different inline components like header 1, header 2, paragraph, and so forth. So I'm actually going to scroll down and I'm going to find the code for header 2, which looks something like this. And as you can see here, this is like header 1 here. This is header 2, header 3. I'm going to look at header 2 actually. I'm going to grab the code for here. These aren't actually pre-built components that you install, but rather you can just take the code from them. So I'm going to take this class name here. I'm going to go ahead and copy all this. And then for our post title, I'm going to paste that in here. Let's look at our page. If I save that, you can see now it looks a bit bigger and a little bit nicer in my opinion. And just to make it look a little cooler, we're going to make it blue. So we're going to do background primary. Oops, not background primary. There should be text primary to make sure this gets set to our primary blue. And now I honestly think we're probably good to go for these cards, at least for the moment. But since we're on this page, let's quickly navigate to the home page since that's the card's parent component. So we'll go ahead and navigate to the home page here, and we'll just make a couple of small changes here. For this outermost div right here, let's just give this class name a couple of properties. I want to make this flex. I'm going to give it flex column, item center, and then I'm going to do with full, and then go ahead and save. And this makes sure that we have nice column cards and they are centered. Although now if you notice the cards are taking up the entire width of the screen, so I want to go ahead and change that. So let's make a quick change to the inner div here where we're mapping our posts. I'm going to make that div right now. I'm going to make this div like this, wrap it around here, and then I'm going to give this a class name of a couple of things. I'm just going to say width 1/3 because we don't want it to be the entire width of the screen. I'll just say I want it to be 1/3 of the screen. And then I'm going to also add top margins of 4 here just to separate it out from the navbar a little bit. Go ahead and save this. And now we should be good to go. The 1/3 might look a little goofy because the screen is shrunk here, but if we expand it out, the 1/3 looks a little more natural. So let's go ahead and take this back here and go back to our split tabs here. So what happens if we actually click on a blog DAO? We get to this page and holy hell, it looks really bad. If we go ahead and go over here and full screen this page, we can see what's actually going on here. The obvious problem is that this picture is huge and needs to be shrunk down. But also notice how all of our information here is in the form of a row. We have our button over here, our back button, our title right here, our description, our picture, and then all of our content right here. So it's basically just flowing from left to right rather than from top to bottom. To fix that, let's go ahead and go in here and let's go into our ReadBlog component. So I'll go into here. And the first thing I actually want to do is add an outer div to this JSX here so that we can add some styling. The most basic thing we could do here to get it into a column format is to give it a class name of flex and then flex column. Go ahead and save it. And now if we go back to this page here and save it, we can see that it's now going from top to bottom. Now we can obviously see that this picture is still huge and needs to be fixed. However, it is in a column format instead of a row format, which is a good first step. To go ahead and fix the styling of this image, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it in a div here. So I'll take this closing tag, surround this image tag here. I'm going to give this a class name we'll give it a flex, so it's flex box. Let's say width full, and then let's say justify center. And then for the actual image itself, I'm going to go ahead and extend this class name here, and I'm going to give it a max, I'm going to give it a max height of 96, so it never exceeds that, and then we'll give it margin Y of 4, so it gives these as 4 pixels of vertical margins. Go ahead and save it now, and we're already looking a lot cleaner. If you want to mess with the max height, feel free to, but I'm going to go ahead and take this tab here. I'm just going to resize this back to our screen here, and let's get back into the code, and let's do some styling changes starting from the top with this back button. To start with the button, let's first import the button from Shadcn. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to import button here from the components. And then for this back button here, let's actually go and implement this button. And all we need to do that is just change this to a capital B, so it knows we're talking about the component we just imported. Go ahead and save this, and this button now is styled like Shadcn. Next, let's just do some basic Tailwind. I'm going to make this parent div right here. I'm going to give it a width. Let's say a width of 1/3, similar to our cards. I don't want massive amounts of space being taken up, so we're making our view a little bit smaller. Go ahead and save this. And here, it does look a little bit goofy if we're on this view of half the page here. But again, if we full screen this, it looks a little cleaner. Let's actually now clean up this button so it doesn't take up the entire width. So I'll go ahead and bring this back here, move this over. And I'm actually going to do the same thing for the button. I'm going to give it a width of 1/3. So I can add that in here. I'll say class name equals, I'll say width 1/3, just like this. Save it. And to get it in the center, all we need to do is go into our parent div, and we need to type items-center, and this will actually center the button right in the middle. Next, let's get back into our typography on Shadcn, and I want to copy a few of these things. So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to look at the H1 code, and I'm going to copy this Tailwind right here, and on our, actually I'll copy this whole thing here, and then on our H1 in our app, I'm actually just going to paste this in, and go ahead and save it, and head back to our page, and you can see the typography now looks a little bit different. And I'm actually going to do that same thing for each one of these headings here. So for heading 2, I will take the heading 2 typography, and this is just for a convenience thing, because it already has some pre-built stuff, so it saves us some time having to figure out the styling. So I have this in here for header 2, let's do this here for header 3, so we'll copy this, paste the header 3 in here, and then we'll do P as well. So we'll go P here, let's go class name, copy this, and let's just put it right in here. Let's go and look at our page. Go ahead and save it. And now typography looks a little bit cleaner. Lastly, let's just get this text figured out on this page. If we go ahead and look on this page, you can see that this text is just one giant big blob, and it's not very readable. So let's go ahead and go into our code, and let's fix that. All we need to do on our p tag here in our class name is just add another property. And that's just going to be white space, and that's -pre -wrap. Go ahead and save it, and now you can see we have actual division of our text. We're going to go ahead and make a few stylistic changes based on what we're seeing on this page here. First of all, I still think this back button is a little bit too large, and it's also too close to the navbar, so let's go ahead and fix those two things. Let's go to the back button, and for class name, I'm going to give it, let's just test what 48 looks like. Let's save that, and that actually looks a lot better in my opinion, so it's not quite as wide. Let's also go in here and let's add some margins to this button. Let's add vertical margins, let's say of 4. That way it is a bit separated from everything else. The next thing I want to change is this text here. Notice how this text is kind of centered in the way where it's not really left aligned here, it's kind of center aligned. Let's go ahead and actually left align it. So all we need to do that is make sure we're in our p tag here where our text is actually located. Let's give it a property of text left and save it. And that way it looks a little bit cleaner. So now it is all left aligned. Let's also space out this title and this description here so that they're not so close together and so clumped up. So let's go ahead and go into, let's say our title header here. Let's give it some bottom margins. Let's just say bottom margins of 2. And then we'll actually do the exact same for this one as well. So that way we can space it out a little bit more. And then just to play around with the colors a little bit, let's make our title here actually blue instead of black. So let's go into our title header, which should be this first H1 still. And let's just give it a, let's say primary, or sorry, should be text, primary, go ahead and save it. And now the text is blue, and in my opinion, looks a little bit better than the black text. The very next thing we should do is go to our CreateBlog Page in order, because right now, if we go ahead and navigate to this page here, you can see it looks pretty rough, not a really whole lot going on this page. Before we do that, let's go ahead and just fix this screen here so we can have this screen again. And let's go ahead and navigate to the CreateBlog page. First things first, I want to import a couple of our Shadcn components. So I actually want to use two components. I first want to get the inputs from Shadcn, and then I also want to get button as well. So we'll import those two just as normal. And there's actually two components I actually want to add from Shadcn as well. If we go into our components right now, we can see we just have button, card, input, and navigation menu. But I actually want to add two more, and that's label and text area. So I'm going to go to Shadcn's website, and I'm going to find label. Let's get this one here, and let's add this one. As usual, we'll go ahead and take this command here, and let's copy it using npm. And let's go into our terminal. Let's open it back up. Open up a new one here. Go into the front end folder, and then let's just copy and paste this command here, and that will add the label from Shadcn. Let's do the exact same thing for the text area component. So I'm going to take text area, go ahead and copy this as well, and let's paste that. So we add text area as a component as well. And just like every other time, whenever we run that command, it should add a file here in our components/UI folder that adds the text area as well as the label. Let's go ahead and go back here, and let's go back to our CreateBlog, and let's import those two components. So first we'll import a label. That should be from this folder. And then next we will import text area, and that should be from this folder as well. Once we have those things imported, all I'm really going to do is go ahead and scroll down here, and let's change all of our fields from being these default labels and text areas to being the Shadcn version. So I'm just going to take all these, change these to capital L, so it's the Shadcn version. I'll do that for labels, and I'll also make sure the ending tags are correct as well. It's a little bit tedious, but should make it look quite a bit nicer. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for inputs and text area and button as well. So let's actually do it for all of these. So let's do inputs, inputs. And again, remember that the reason why we do this is because the Shadcn components are always capitalized. So whenever we capitalize it after importing a Shadcn component, that's what actually gets it to be Shadcn and not the default. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and navigate back to this page here. I'm going to save it. And here, this page looks a little bit nicer than it did before. Next, let's just add a couple more things. Let's go ahead and wrap this whole form in a parent div to do some more styling. So let's take this closing tag, paste it down here, and let's give this div here a class name. And I want to give it a few properties. I want to say flex, justify center, and I want to do width 1/3. Go ahead and save it, and it should not really do anything for right now, but you'll see what I'm doing here in a second. For the button at the very bottom, I'm going to give it its own class name. I'll scroll down here a little bit so you can see it better. And I'm just going to give it some top margins of 4. That way it's not touching this last file field here. So I'm going to say margin top 4, save it, and the button's now a bit separated. Lastly, I want to take the labels that we have here, and instead of having them centered in the middle of the page, I want to have them on the left side of the box. That way I think it looks a little bit cleaner in my opinion. So what we can do to do that is for each label here, let's give each label a class name. And I'm going to give it flex, let's say left 0, that way it's fully left aligned. And then we're going to give it a padding of 2. I'm going to go ahead and take this class name and put it into each label. We can avoid having to retype all of it. And go ahead and save it. And you can see now the labels are on the left side and have a bit of padding. And let's actually add one final thing to this page here. For the file input, I want to add a few properties. So in this input here, we'll scroll all the way to the end here. Let's go ahead and add a class name. And I want to give it, a couple of things. I just want to say cursor pointer, and then we're going to give it a hover colors. That way when you're hovering over it, it looks a little bit cleaner. So we're going to say hover, and then let's just give the accent for the background. So go ahead and save it. And that way what you can see is whenever you hover over this thing now, it highlights a little bit of a gray color so you can see what you're actually about to click on. Just so you can see what this page looks like full screen, we'll go ahead and full screen this, and you can see it looks like this. These boxes are still a little bit small, so let's go ahead and actually fix this thing here. When I had this flex, justify center, and width 1/3, let's make sure this is working properly. Just so we can test and find out what's actually going on here, let's go back to our page and let's actually open up the console here. And let's go ahead and look at what's actually being displayed on the page. So if we look at our main here, we can see the main is actually the entire width of the screen. And then this width 1/3 class here, which is the div, which is what wraps around this form here, you can see that this takes up the space here. But it looks like because there's all this empty purple space that's open here, what we actually need to do is go in, we'll go into here. And instead of doing this, I'm actually going to say this should be full width. So it takes up the entire width of the page. And then I'm actually going to give the form a class name, and this one will say width 1/3. And now if we go ahead and save it, there we go. It looks a lot better. Now it's actually 1/3 of the page instead of just being 1/3 of that small container that it was already in. And actually, because this whole main thing is taking up the entire width of the page anyways, we actually don't need this div like I thought we would. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and just delete this just to have what we had before, where we just have the form. And this should look the exact same. Let me go ahead and save it. And yeah, you can see it made no changes. So it was a bit of an unnecessary step to add that div in here. So we'll just leave it like this and call this good. The next thing I want to focus on is doing the About Us and the Contact pages. And then we'll save the profile page for last. So as first with our About Us page, I'm actually not going to import anything really special. I'm going to go ahead and navigate. I'll just full screen this since we have both in full screen anyways. Let's go here and let's navigate to the About page. And then here, all I really want to do is take the typography that we have in the ReadBlog page. So if I go over here, remember that we copied some typography to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm actually going to take this typography here we have for P, this class name. I'm going to copy it, go back to our About page, and everywhere where we have this, I'm just going to paste that in here. That way, it matches what's on our ReadBlog page. If we go ahead and save this now and go back, the text looks like it is the Shadcn styling rather than the default styling. And then for this top label here, for this About Us, I'm actually going to go in here as well and take the typography for H1, because that's what we have in the About page. I'll take this, copy all of it, head back here. Let's just paste it in here. So like I said, we're not actually taking any Shadcn components and importing them and then rendering them. All we're doing is taking the typography from it and then just copying and paste it into our code to make it nice and easy. Go ahead and save this, and you can see now we have this nice little label that has the same styling as the other page. And I actually want to do the exact same thing with the contact page. So I'm going to go ahead and I already have the H1 copied on my clipboard. So I'm going to head and find the contact page here. And then for H1, I'm going to make that this. I'm going to save it. And then I'll go here in the P tag as well. And just like before, we're going to copy and paste these. Save it. For this form, however, that we have right here, right now it doesn't look very good. So I'm actually going to use some Shadcn components for that as well. So let's go ahead and import a few at the top of this page. The ones I want to use for right now are button. I want to also use label. I want to use input. And then I also want to use input here. And then lastly, I want to use text area. We're going to do a very similar thing on this page like we did with the CreateBlog page, and that's changing all of these here to the Shadcn equivalent. So for label, I want to change these all to capital L, so it's the Shadcn component. And we're going to go through this for each one of these and do that just like on the last time. That way we make it just look a little bit nicer. So we'll make sure input is like that as well. Capitalize these. And we have two more, just the text area and the button. And we'll make sure the closing tags are good as well. I go ahead and change those, save those, head back to the page. Doesn't look perfect, but it looks a lot better than it did before. And we'll also do the same thing just to give this button a little bit more space here. We're going to give it class name of margin top 4. So now it's separated from the box and it looks a bit more nice and spaced out. And one thing I'll do as well, like we did last time, is just giving these a width of 1/3. So I'm going to go ahead and make class name here. Let's say width of 1/3 for this page. Save it. And now it's a bit more spaced out. Then I'm also going to go into the About page and do the exact same thing. So say width of 1/3. And you can see now both the About Us and the contact pages are centered, or not centered, sorry. They are with 1/3. But one thing we should still try and do here, like I just said a minute ago, little Freudian slip, was centering. So right now it's a little bit awkward because the forms are centered and the text is left aligned on both of these pages. So let's go ahead and fix that really quick. A simple fix would be just to go into, let's say, the contact page here, and let's look at these P tags. And I'm just going to add, let's see, these all have text left. So let's go ahead and make these text center. Save it. And if we go back to our page, now they should all be centered. Let's go ahead and actually give this one some bottom margin as well. So that way it's not so close to the form. So let's just say margin bottom. Let's give it 8. And that separates out the form a little bit from the text. Let's also go into the About page and change the same thing. So these all say text left. But that's not what we want. We want center instead. So let's go and replace all these lefts right here with center. Save it. And now on both of our pages, all the text as well as the form is centered, which is exactly what we wanted. One final thing on this contact page. Notice how on the CreateBlog page, we ended up fixing these labels here. So they're on the left side and they have a little bit more padding. Let's go ahead and do the exact same thing for contact as well. So I believe the things we added last time, if we go ahead and go to the labels, is we just added class name and it was flex, left 0, and I think it was 2 padding. So let's go ahead and copy this, paste it into these labels here, and we can see this is what our page looks like right now. If we go ahead and save it, this is what our page looks like afterwards. So now all the labels are just on the left side, and we have a bit more space between each text area here, which makes it look a little bit cleaner. Now that we've finished up with this page, we have now taken care of the contact page, the about us page, the create blog page, and the home page, as well as the page where we can read a particular blog. However, there's one more page that we haven't touched yet, which is the profile page. So let's go ahead and finish this one last. For this profile page, I'm actually not going to use any Shadcn components here, just the typology. So I'm going to go into the, I think it's the ReadBlog Page, and I'm going to go ahead and take the typology that I had for header 2 here. I'm going to copy it, go back to our profile page. I'm going to copy in that for our labels. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here, here, and here. Go ahead and save this page. And you can see this typography looks a little bit better now. However, as you can tell, the obvious problem with this page is that it's all in one really ugly looking row format, not the column format. And there's actually a super easy fix to this. If we just give this an outer div here, instead of having it be these empty tags, it should apply our base CSS, and we go in here, and now it's in a column format, so it's a lot nicer than the row. One thing that might be a little bit hard to see right now is below each of these labels, there is this gray line here that is a bottom border. And we actually don't want that, so I'm going to go into our code, and for each of these, just delete this border B to get rid of that bottom border so it doesn't look as weird. So yeah, now those are gone. And just like our other pages, I actually want to make this width of this page 1/3 of the screen size. So in our div here, I'm going to give it a class name of width 1/3. Go ahead and save it, and now we can see it is now 1/3 the size of the screen instead of being smashed into a much smaller container. Next, let's say for whatever reason we don't want these labels and this user information to be right centered in the middle of the screen, but rather aligned with the left side of the container. One way we can do that is to just go into our class name here and give it properties of flex, and we'll say left 0. That'll make it a flex box and make sure it's on the very left side. So if I just take this flex and left 0 I added, and I go ahead and copy and paste it into the others here and save it, you will see now our labels are aligned to the left-hand side. However, just so it's not awkward, we also want to shift over the information to the left-hand side as well. So let's also add a class name to each of these header 2s, and we will add the same thing with flex and left 0. So we'll just go ahead and paste that in. I'll go ahead and just copy this whole thing, paste it here, and paste it here, so that now everything should be aligned to the left-hand side. Just so we can generate some space between some of these entries, I'm going to add some bottom margins to each of our information headers here. So I'm going to give this one, let's just say bottom margin of, let's say 2. I'll copy and paste that into each of these, and we'll save it, and we'll see how this looks. And I do think it looks a little bit better, but we could maybe go a little bit higher. Let's try bottom margin of 4. And there we go. In my opinion, it looks a little bit nicer than margin 2. And now we have this page mostly fleshed out. I'm not going to mess with it for right now, but if you wanted to, you could take this date and convert it into the actual date format, kind of like we did on the pages where you can actually read the blogs. Like here it says February 14th, 2024, instead of having this long string. But since we already did that on the code for the ReadBlog page, I'm not going to mess with it on the profile page, but that's something you can feel free to add if you'd like. Before we start wrapping things up with this styling, there's one more thing I actually want to fix, and it's kind of bugging me. If you notice at the top of the page here, this logout button has no border or anything around it, and it's kind of just awkwardly sitting there. So let's actually head into the code for our navbar, if I can find it right here, and let's change the code for that login button so it looks a bit better. And actually, I'm curious to see, because in our navbar we have the Shadcn navigation menu link, I'm curious to see what that would look like for this button here. So I'm actually going to change this to navigation menu link. Oops. Should be this one. And we'll do the same for the closing tag. And go ahead and save it. And it didn't make it much different, so let's add some modifications. We may have to add this thing as well, so let's add this class name in here. We'll do it right before our onClick property and save it. And you can see now it looks much more similar to the actual other buttons. But it still looks a little bit weird, and you want it to actually stand out from the rest of the buttons, so let's add some of our own styling. If we want to add styling to this function here that we already have, we can just add basically like a plus sign here to add more of our own styling. So if we do a class name here plus this current styling thing, we can say, let's give it some left margins. Let's say 2, go ahead and save it. And you'll see it as a class name on top of this already existing function. And let's also give it, let's say, I think we should give it a nice little red color so that it stands out from the rest of the buttons, so you know that it does something like log out. So let's give it a, let's say background red. Let's go 500, a nice like medium red. Go ahead and save it. And oh, I forgot the space here. Go ahead and save it here. And now the logout button should be red and spaced a little bit more apart from the rest of the buttons. This isn't perfect, but it gets the job done. We could easily make some improvements to this navbar or to any of these other pages, but let's review all the styling we've done so far so that we can wrap up this episode. Let's do a quick scan of all the pages that we have so far, starting with the landing page. So I'm actually going to go and log out, take us back to the landing page, and here we're met with the first page that we get when a user enters the site. On this first view here, we have the login view where our user can enter their email and password, and we have the login and create new account buttons. If we click create new account, it opens up a field where we can actually create a new account, which as we know will upload a new user to MongoDB. Let's go ahead and just log into the site so we can start testing our other things. Well, I believe this should be the correct login information. Let's log in here, and it takes us to the main page, which we are calling this the home page. On the home page, in a super simplified format, we just have all the blog posts displayed as a card, where whenever you hover over them, we can click on each one. Let's click on a blog post called The Power of Solitude, and it takes us to a page where you can actually read the blog itself. So we have all this text here, we have information about it like its title, description, its image, and the date it was created. And of course we can go on this back button to navigate back. Let's say we want to access another page, we can go to Exploring the Art of Mindful Cooking, and we can read this blog instead. Those two pages, the home page and this ReadBlog page, are the bread and butter of our application. Let's check out the other ones that we have. We have the CreateBlog page where you can actually write a blog. So we can do the title here, the description here, fill out all the content, which can be just as much text as we pretty much want. And then we can insert a file here to be uploaded to AWS that will display whenever a user wants to read a particular blog. After this, we have the profile page, which we just did, where you can see your name, email, join date, and all the blogs that you yourself have posted. Then we have, of course, the About Us page, which is just a super simple page with some text telling us about, whatever the site is. And this obviously is kind of this filler text. And then we have the contact page where we have a mock form. It doesn't actually do anything right now, but if we wanted to, it could. Where we just fill in some form data like name, email, and message if we wanted to contact the owners of the site. And of course, we have the logout button to get us logged out and back to the landing page. If you would like to get more creative with this site, please feel free to do so. This wasn't meant to make your site look professionally deployable, but at least give you a basic understanding of what styling a website looks like, particularly if you're using Tailwind and a collection of pre-built components like Shadcn. There's one thing I didn't include in this episode due to it being a little bit outside of the scope, but it's very, very important if you want to actually do styling in the future for an actual website, and that's designing styling for multiple screen sizes. The site you're seeing right now looks nice when I'm on this computer, but if I were to access this site from, let's say, a mobile device right now, I can pretty much guarantee that the site would look pretty bad, because it's all styled to fit this screen size and not the size of a mobile screen. If you check out this page on Tailwind's website, this responsive design page, it gives you a guide on how to make a responsive design, meaning a site that will change its look depending on what screen size the user has. It revolves around using prefixes like small, medium, and large before styling properties within the class name, in order to give different properties based on size. I highly recommend checking this page out if you want to make a website that has responsive design. Now that we have that understanding and they've covered pretty much all the bases, I'm going to end this episode here, and that is going to draw this series to a close. When we first started, we were just getting a bare bones React app working and just learning how to set up a server. Now that we've gone through this series, we've learned everything from handling database interactions to front-end and back-end interactions via HTTP, user encryption, and all sorts of other things. I really hope this course was able to help give you at least a basic understanding of how full stack development works and how you can handle all of its moving parts. I highly encourage you to keep practicing stuff on your own and come back to this course as a guide if you ever need it. Thanks so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you soon.